Okay, sounds good. Good evening and welcome back to a joint meeting of the Burbank City Council and the Parking Authority. Today remains Tuesday, November 19th, 2024. The first study session item tonight is a review of the general fund's financial status as of September 30th, 2024. I do want to just note, although the public comment period is passed, we did receive a card while we were in closed session from a Moira Paris, not wishing to speak, but wishing to voice support on behalf of the library board. And I think this actually goes to our second study session item. With all that said, we would like to welcome Mrs. Jennifer Becker, Financial Services Director, to begin our presentation this evening.
Thank you, and good evening, Mayor Schultz and members of the City Council. I'm Jennifer Becker, Financial Services Director, and I'm here tonight to present you with a review of the General Fund's financial status as of the first quarter of fiscal year 2024-2025. If we could bring up our presentation, thank you. As part of this report, I'm going to give a brief summary of our fiscal year 23-24 year-end results for the General Fund to give us a starting point. Just to note that these numbers are not yet considered officially final, as the city is still in the midst of our annual year-end audit process. We'll then review our first quarter general fund results for both revenues and expenditures. As a reminder, the city's budget is based on a fiscal year that begins on July 1. So the first quarter results we are reviewing tonight cover the period from July 1 to September 30th, 2024. And then we'll take a look at that first quarter information. We'll taking that into account and look at our year-end financial projections for the general fund on both a recurring and a one-time basis. We'll provide the council with a pension funding update based on the latest reports we've received from CalPERS in August and September. And factoring in all of that information, we'll conclude with a look ahead at the city's 5-year financial forecast. So let's start with our fiscal year 2023-24 year-end results. At the time of budget adoption, we projected a fiscal year 23-24 year-end balance of just under $26 million to start the fiscal year. Our actual balance at year-end was almost $44 million. And there were a couple of things going on that happened to push up this cash balance. On the expenditure side, our year-end budget savings was about $2 million higher than we projected it to be, factoring in carryover appropriations that were approved by the City Council in August. We typically assume a year-end budget savings of about 2% of the recurring budget, and we ended up with a savings of about 2.8%. On the other side, Burbank's year-end revenue results surpassed expectations for the third year in a row. Recurring revenues came in at 7% or $16 million higher than the revised projections we brought to you during the mid-year report, which we'll discuss in detail in a moment. Additionally, the city received some one-time revenues for items like grants that also contributed to our general fund year-end balance. So as I noted, the city is in the midst of our annual financial audit. So these numbers aren't final until such time as we receive an opinion from our independent financial audit firm of Lance Soul and Longhard LLP. We anticipate wrapping up the audit before the end of the calendar year, and will return to both the Audit Committee and the City Council in January with our fiscal year 2023-24 annual comprehensive financial report. So here is a look at our general fund revenues as of the end of the first quarter. The table here shows our actual results for fiscal year 23-24, our adopted general fund revenues for the current fiscal year, which is 24-25, our revised projections for this year, and the actual revenues received through the first quarter of the fiscal year, representing July through September. You can see that even though we are about 25% through our year, we have actually only received 9.6% of our revised projected annual revenue. This is actually to be expected based on the natural timing of our revenue receipts. At this time last year, we had received 10.5% prior to any revenue adjustments. So as I mentioned on the previous slide, actual recurring revenues in 23-24 came in $16 million higher than our revised projections, outperforming expectations in multiple categories. So given those revenue results from the end of last year, combined with new data we have for the current year, we are recommending revising our projected fiscal year 24-25 revenues across several categories for a total increase to our forecast of $7.6 million. And that's highlighted in that red box you see on the screen. This is an increase of about 3.2% from our original revenue projections we provided during the budget process. In general, the adjustments are results of some gains in the city's assessed value, as well as continued demand for city services, particularly related to development. The revenue adjustments bring us mostly in line with actual receipts from the prior year, but of course we'll continue to monitor revenues regularly for any additional adjustments we can make when we return to you with our mid-year report in February. So let's take a closer look at some of these specific general fund revenue categories we're adjusting on the next few slides. And we're going to start, of course, with property tax, which is our most significant revenue source, as well as our most significant revenue adjustment we are making tonight. Property tax remains Burbank's largest revenue, with the current year revenues based on assessed values determined in the prior year. In November, just a couple weeks ago, we received our updated assessed valuation, which is applicable to our 2024-25 revenues. And our citywide assessed valuation increased by $1.6 billion, or 4.9% from the prior year. So compare that to that CPI cap of 2% that is dictated by Prop 13. That really is an excellent result. So some of the drivers which account for our increasing assessed value include the reassessments of new developments in the city. Developments like Avion, Warner Brothers Second Century, First Street Village, and Pickwick are perfect examples of projects that are driving that growth, and we know there are many others on the horizon in future years. Transfers of ownership also contributed to strong gains in commercial and residential values throughout the city, accounting for 29% of the city's overall growth. And lastly, Burbank experienced another substantial increase in unsecured property values. This is predominantly a result of new private aircraft being stored or parked at the Hollywood Burbank Airport, but it also includes new investments in heavy equipment by some of Burbank's largest entertainment companies. Burbank's residential housing market continues to remain strong, despite high interest rates creating challenges for those seeking a mortgage. The median single-family home sale price in Burbank for the third quarter of 2024 was $1.3 million, roughly the same as it was a year ago. Recent Fed rate drops haven't done a lot to move the needle on the housing market quite yet, but economists predict a slightly rosier picture for 2025 and 2026, with an outlook for higher home sales and moderating mortgage rates. So interestingly, the biggest driver of our revised forecast for property tax actually has very little to do with our assessed value. The continued unwinding of redevelopment has led to more residual distributions of property tax for all of Burbank's taxing entities. In this past year, the RDA loan to the general fund was paid off, and there was a reduction to the bond principal payment owed from the successor agency. These prior debt obligations then go back into the general pool of property tax revenue, of which Burbank receives its 18% share. Burbank's revenue from residual distributions increased by $2.5 million in fiscal year 23-24, and we expect that to be a recurring trend. Combine that with our excellent growth in assessed value once again, and we are able to increase our current year forecast for property tax by $3.7 million. So like property tax, our service charge revenues also came in well over projections in 23-24. So we are recommending an increase to the 24-25 forecast of $2.4 million to true up those revenues to the prior year. Leading the way in our service charge categories was an increase in various construction and development-related revenues across several departments, including plan check, building fees, curb inspections, encroachments, and fire permits. Emergency medical services, or EMS, also experienced a significant increase in revenues, largely due to a higher volume of calls for service for our EMS. The demand for park and rec programs also continues, with aquatics, after-school programs, and golf revenues all coming in over projections in 23-24. And lastly, we saw a bit of a bump in both film permits and related filming services. Related to all that development, building permits and license fees ended the year with a whopping $9 million in revenue, exceeding our $6.7 million forecast by 35%. A couple of unique major development projects pulled permits in fiscal year 23-24, which generated a large portion of that revenue. And while we don't necessarily expect to repeat that same number this year, we are increasing our forecast by $750,000 to account for the continued development of several large projects in Burbank. The next revenue adjustment I'd like to discuss is within our interest and use of money category. As you know, the city treasurer invests all of the city's idle cash so our money can continue to work for us when it's not in use. The city's portfolio continues to benefit from the high interest rate environment, as well as a larger than anticipated general fund cash balance due to the strong performance of our revenues, in addition to our fully funded cash reserves. As a result, interest earnings for the fiscal year 2023-2024 surpassed projections by nearly $800,000. As such, we are adjusting fiscal year 24-25 interest revenues by $500,000 to bring our projections closer, but not quite equal to last year's actuals. We've already experienced a couple small federal interest rate drops in the current fiscal year, with more expected in the coming months, so it's unlikely we'll experience any additional growth in this revenue category over last year's results. Transient parking tax, or TPT revenue, also outperformed expectations in 23-24, so we're making an adjustment to our forecast of $300,000 for this current fiscal year. As you've heard me say before, 90% of our TPT revenue is derived from parking lots surrounding the Hollywood Burbank Airport. The chart here on this slide shows passenger counts at the airport over the past 5 years, as well as the current year to date. And this pretty much mirrors our TPT revenue performance. After 3 years of recovery from the pandemic, 2023 was the first year where passenger counts exceeded 2019 levels. And so far, 2024 is on track to surpass 2023. So it's back to business as usual for the airport, and we'll be curious to see what TPT revenue looks like once the new terminal is completed. So moving on to transient occupancy tax, or TOT. Burbank has shown steady improvement in TOT revenue since the pandemic, with revenue exceeding pre-pandemic levels, coming in at $13.2 million in 2023-24. The graph here shows occupancy rates in the blue bars and average daily rates charged for Burbank's hotels for the past 5 years, as well as the current year to date. Burbank's hotel occupancy rate from January through September of 2024 is 76.2%, compared to 75.2% and 73.5% in the past 2 years. While that doesn't seem like much of an increase, it's important to note that in December of 2023, we added 150 rooms to Burbank's inventory with the opening of the new Cambria Hotel. The average room rate collected by Burbank hotels is at $183 a night, a small drop from $192 in 2023, likely due to some introductory pricing at our newest hotel. Overall, Burbank's average daily rate is up 11% since 2019, driven by both a nice recovery of the tourism industry in town, as well as the impacts of inflation. With the opening of the Cambria Hotel, we brought you a pretty sizable revision to the TOT forecast as part of the budget adoption, so we're not proposing any additional revisions to our TOT forecast tonight. And one last revenue category that I want to discuss, since it is such a significant revenue source for the city, and that, of course, is sales tax. Fiscal year 23-24 year-end results for sales tax were about 0.7%, or $400,000 over our revised projections, so pretty much right on target for the year. However, there are some causes for concern as we move into the current year. The most recent sales tax results we have are from the second quarter of the 2024 calendar year, which covers April through June. Actual receipts were up 11.8% from the prior year, which helped us meet our forecast. But this increase was largely due to one significant taxpayer restatement that was a correction for the prior year. After adjusting for that large one-time payment, actual sales in the city of Burbank were down 2.3% from the same quarter in the prior year. The auto industry is leading this decline in sales, down 23% from the prior year. There's no doubt that continuing high interest rates and a tight credit market continue to hamper auto sales, and increased insurance costs are also having an impact on receipts as consumers are shifting to either lower-priced new models or used cars in an effort to save money. Burbank's entertainment industry is also continuing to experience the lingering effects of last year's writers and actors strikes, with business and industry sales, that category, down 11% from the same quarter in the prior year. Specifically, motion picture sales were down 18% from the prior year. These results are definitely kind of behind where we thought we would be 6 months after the strikes ended, but we're still holding out hope that it really just represents a lagging recovery for our local entertainment industry and not a representation of the new normal. And general consumer goods is also in a bit of a slump, down 3% as consumers remained skittish about the economy. A looming election combined, especially a very contentious one, often has impact on consumer confidence as they are blasted with constant messages of woe and despair on their television. We're cautiously optimistic that with the election being over, this will ease a little bit, and interest rates ticking down also helps. The National Retail Federation is forecasting that the 2024 winter holiday spending is expected to grow between 2.5% and 3.5% over last year. So that would be a nice bit of a turnaround from what we're seeing now with general consumer goods. So without a full quarter of sales tax returns for the current year, we're holding off on making any revisions to our sales tax forecast, but we will return at mid-year in February with updated projections as well for sales tax as well as our other general fund revenue categories. Okay, so we're going to shift from revenues to expenses now and take a look at our general fund expenditures for the first quarter. Overall, general fund expenditures were at 26.1% as of September 30th, which only slightly exceeds the general expectation of 25% for the 3-month period into the fiscal year. This difference is predominantly due to non-departmental expenditures, which are 58% expended due to several large one-time payments and contributions that take place at the beginning of the year. This includes our one-time pension payment made to CalPERS in July as part of our pension funding plan, as well as the $4.7 million annual contribution to our infrastructure fund in accordance with Measure P. The fire department is trending slightly above budget at almost 29%, largely due to reimbursable strike team expenses, in addition to constant staffing costs required to maintain the department's minimum staffing levels. Once we factor in anticipated revenue from those strike team reimbursements, the department's expenditures will be within budget for the first quarter. And all other departments currently are at or below their anticipated expenditures for the first quarter of the fiscal year. So before I move on to our 5-year forecast, I wanted to take a moment to provide you with the latest update from CalPERS, as the city has received a new set of pension actuarial reports since the adoption of our fiscal year 24-25 budget. You may remember back a year ago that CalPERS ended the 22-23 fiscal year with a net investment gain of 5.8%, just a little below their expected rate of return of 6.8%. Fortunately, because the city has continued to make additional discretionary payments to CalPERS over the last several years, our latest actuarial reports that we received in August actually reflected a slight improvement, with the average funded status of the city's 3 pension plans going from 73.9% to 77.1%. Small increase, but we'll take it. These losses also impact our unfunded actuarial, So fortunately, CalPERS, like many of us, actually had a great investment year in fiscal year 23-24, with year-end returns coming in at 9.3%. Even better for local agencies, the CalPERS board this year elected not to lower their expected rate of return like they did last time they had a significant gain. So that's good news for Burbank. We expect to see a modest improvement in the city's funded status and a slight reduction in our UAL payment next year at this time. So that would be for the 26-27 budget, thanks to those better than anticipated June 2024 returns. Of course, the performance of the stock market will still largely dictate future CalPERS returns, so we'll all keep our fingers crossed that the recent momentum in the market continues its positive trend. So the chart here shows our pension costs for each of the city's 3 plans for the prior year, the current year, and the next 2 budget years. The normal cost rate is displayed as a percent of total payroll, and the UAL cost is shown as a dollar amount. So 2 things to note here. First, you can see year by year that the city's normal cost rate for all 3 plans continues to decline. This is due to the continued incorporation of PEPRA employees, making up a larger share of our workforce. Currently, 60% of our PERSable workforce in Burbank now falls under PEPRA. While the UAL payment amounts to dropped last year, you can see that they're going right back up in fiscal year 24-25 due to those aforementioned CalPERS returns. Fortunately, because we knew those investment results a year ago, they were already baked into our 5-year forecast, so you won't see any additional changes to our long-term financial projections as a result of these latest CalPERS reports. So the chart here shows us the performance of CalPERS investment returns since 2000. When you take this historical view, the ups and downs we've experienced in the past few years are pretty consistent with the past couple decades of performance. What's significant here is not necessarily the peaks and valleys, but the overall long-term trends in CalPERS performance. Since the year 2000, CalPERS has averaged a rate of return of 6.5%. So this is what drove them to lower the discount rate from 7% to 6.8% 3 years ago, in addition to changing some of their investment strategies in recent years. Many believe that CalPERS will continue to try and adjust down that discount rate in future years until it reaches that 6.5% average. But of course, the financial impacts to CalPERS agencies of doing so is pretty significant. What's interesting to me here is that if you were to remove their worst performing year that occurred in 2009 following the housing market crash and their best performing year in 2021, which was the rebound from the pandemic, their average returns would actually be over 7% during this time horizon. So the actuaries of years past were actually pretty on the mark. So despite the ups and downs of CalPERS, the city has continued to invest available one-time funds towards the city's pension liabilities over the past several years in an effort to mitigate future increases to our UAL costs. As part of the budget adoption in June, the City Council approved an expansion of their original pension funding plan, committing $9 million towards paying down the city's unfunded pension liability in the current fiscal year, with another $4.5 million scheduled for the upcoming 25-26 fiscal year. In July of 2024, the city made that $9 million additional payment. Then in September of 2024, CalPERS provided the city with an update of our revised UAL payment amounts for fiscal year 25-26, which accounts for the July payment. The total citywide recurring savings generated was $1.5 million citywide, with $1 million of that amount directly benefiting the general fund. As these ADPs have been a proven strategy in lowering the city's recurring pension costs, staff will continue to bring recommendations to the City Council to invest more one-time funds for this purpose until such time as we start to see our UAL costs decline, which is actually projected to be around the 2031-32 fiscal year. So given all of the revised revenue and expense information we provided tonight, let's take a look at the general fund's overall financial position, and we'll start with our projected balance for the current fiscal year. Based on our adopted revenues, our recommended first quarter revenue adjustments, and our adopted budget appropriations, we are projecting a year-end recurring balance of $8.8 million for fiscal year 24-25, which is significantly better than the $1.2 million we projected at the time of budget adoption. As reported earlier, we ended last year with a one-time general fund balance of $43.6 million, and as always, we utilized some of those monies to fully fund the city's formal reserves and compensated absence reserves. That left us with a starting balance of $36.2 million on July 1, 2024. Adding to that is the use of just under $500,000 in one-time resources to fund one-time expenses in 24-25, in addition to another $4.9 million in projected budget savings we anticipate for the current fiscal year. From those resources, we funded $7.2 million in one-time budget items, a $5.8 million general fund additional discretionary payment to CalPERS, and the City Council approved the deposit of $6.4 million into our Section 115 trust. Combining all of those amounts, we are projecting an available non-recurring general fund balance of $22.2 million. So adding together our projected recurring balance of $8.8 million and our projected non-recurring balance of $22.2 million from the previous two slides, we get a total projected general fund spendable balance of $31 million at the end of fiscal year 24-25. So now let's look at how these revised numbers play into our updated general fund 5-year forecast. As reported earlier, the city has a recurring budget balance in the current year of $8.8 million, which you can see in those two bars on the left-hand side. We expect to see that number drop to a $1.2 million balance in fiscal year 25-26 and actually turn into a deficit by 26-27 as we incorporate the impacts of the MOUs with our labor groups, our rising pension payments, and the general inflationary cost increases for goods and services. That recurring budget deficit grows slightly in years 4 and 5 as the city's projected expenses outpaced our forecasted revenue growth. Overall, for the next 5 years, our expenses are projected to grow at an average of 6.5%, while our projected average growth in revenue over that same time period is 4.8%. Now, it's important to keep in mind that that deficit projected in year 5 represents less than 1.3% of the total general fund budget. So a lot can happen in the next 5 years to move that number in a more positive direction. And fortunately, the city's cash position is very strong, with that projected available spendable balance of $31 million. This gives the city the opportunity to make strategic investments in areas that could provide us with more recurring savings in order to mitigate those future deficits, such as paying down pension costs or other liabilities. And we will definitely be returning to the City Council with some recommendations to do just that as part of the fiscal year 25-26 budget process. So, of course, our forecast is based on what we know today, and we are always making updates as circumstances surrounding our assumptions continue to change. This slide looks at some of the unknowns that are always acting to help or hurt our forecast. On the upside is increased tax revenue from continued development throughout the city. Each new development substantially increases the assessed value of a property and provides additional revenue to the city in the form of property tax, permits, plan check, and in many cases, business tax, sales tax, or transient occupancy tax, depending on the type of development. And forecasted federal interest rate reductions should stimulate the housing market along with continued new development. Tourism revenues continue their steady growth following the pandemic, with a new hotel in town and potentially more on the way, and a new airport terminal under construction, which will soon welcome visitors to our great city. And the performance of Burbank's restaurants remains very strong as well, with both tourists and locals alike frequenting our local dining options. We are lowering our UAL pension payments with each year we extend our pension funding plan. And due to our very strong general fund cash position, we were able to expand that plan while still fully funding our reserves, with enough cash left over to insulate the city from any economic downturn or other unanticipated event. Now, on the flip side, the retail sector has not exactly been going gangbusters as of late. Consumers in California and the nation are tightening their belts when it comes to the purchase of tangible goods, and the auto industry really remains sluggish. Locally, our entertainment industry has yet to fully bounce back from those devastating strikes in 2023, and we don't really have an estimated timetable for their recovery. While increasing wages are great for workers, a competitive labor market and an increase to the minimum wage is going to push up costs for labor, both for our own employee groups and for outside contractors that we do business with. And political instability, both at home and abroad, threatens the global economy. Despite the election being over, it's safe to say that there's a lot of unknowns in our future, and we're in for a bumpy ride in the coming years. And lastly, despite our best efforts to manage pension costs, we know that any underperformance of CalPERS investment returns or any changes to their assumptions will still result in cost increases for the city. So fortunately for Burbank, prior City Council decisions have put us in a very strong position to be able to weather those future economic events. Now is a good time to remind the Council that in addition to our projected general fund balance of $31 million, we have fully funded our formal reserves, our compensated absences reserve, and our Section 115 pension trust in accordance with the City Council's financial policies. Altogether, the city has nearly $130 million in available unrestricted funds and reserves. So to conclude our presentation, our current year projected fund balance has been revised to $8.8 million, thanks to strong performance in several of Burbank's revenue categories. And we anticipate a general fund one-time balance of $31 million at the end of the year. However, we expect that balance to decline over the next 5 years and ultimately result in a deficit beginning in 26-27, as rising expenses outpace future projected revenue growth. Of course, there are always risks to our projections, but Burbank's strong cash position allows us the flexibility to weather any future events without significant impact to our residents and businesses. And as always, staff will continue to monitor and update the forecast to account for impacts from the economy as well as any future legislative actions. As I mentioned earlier, we'll be returning to the Council in January to provide you with our fiscal year 23-24 annual comprehensive financial report. Then we'll be back in late February with a mid-year update, which will provide financial results through the end of December and give us another opportunity to make adjustments to current year revenues and appropriations as needed. And then in May of 2025, we'll be back for another budget season with the distribution and presentation of our 25-26 proposed budget. I can't even say that with a straight face, with a scheduled adoption date of June 3rd, 2025. So with that, we recommend the City Council note and file tonight's report, and staff is happy to answer any questions you may have.
Great, thank you very much, Ms. Becker. Colleagues, does anyone have any questions for Ms. Becker? Yes, Councilmember Anthony.
Just two quick questions. If someone owns an airplane, they pay the property taxes in the city in which it's stored?
It's very interesting how airplanes are assessed. The county picks one day per year in which they show up at the airport, and every plane that is currently sitting at the airport gets assessed to Burbank, and that's really how it works.
Oh.
So
What if it's flying around that day?
the assessment doesn't end up in Burbank.
Okay.
I don't know exactly what they actually do with a plane that's in the air, but wherever the plane is situated at the time is where it gets assessed.
Okay. All right. Good to know. I had no idea.
So we have seen it change from year to year. Most cities, unsecured property tax is pretty much the same all the time, but
Right.
Burbank's is pretty wonky at times. It can be up one year, and during COVID, we took a lot of loss to unsecured property tax because nobody was flying and Southwest wasn't parking their planes, and then they all come back when the airport's operational again. So it's kind of interesting to follow unsecured taxes.
Okay. Interesting. My only other question, if you go to the staff report on page 3, all the way at the bottom, the last paragraph, first sentence, fiscal year 23-24, revenues for property taxes were higher. Second sentence, the increase was a result of the payoff of the city loans and the bond principal.
That's right.
The third sentence there, the payments that would have been used to pay off the debt are now part of residual distributions to the general fund. So because we've been paying into the bond and the loans, our payments aren't as high,
So
and so we're not making overpayments. We're keeping the difference.
sort of,
Okay.
yes. So tax increment is what was used to fund redevelopment, and tax increment is it's sort of the capture of the growth in assessed value from year to year, the growth in property taxes. That would go directly to redevelopment agencies. When redevelopment started to unwind, we did away with that tax increment and just made it general property tax. But we had to keep enough tax increment to pay off the bonds that those redevelopment agencies
Because they
issued.
were originally assessed with the tax increment.
Exactly.
Okay.
So as we pay down that debt, which is coming from the tax increment, and we don't need to make those payments anymore, and so this year was a big year because we paid the final payment to Burbank's general fund to pay off the rest of the loan. Now we don't need that tax increment, so it becomes regular property tax, and it goes to all the entities that collect regular property tax. Burbank's share of that is 18%. Some of it goes to the school district, some of it goes to the counties, it goes to a bunch of different entities that
So-
collect on that.
So it's a residual distribution of the whole property tax, which is 18% back to
Yeah,
us.
we're getting our share of the leftovers, basically.
Gotcha.
is
So
how
we've
that
cleared
works.
the debt. Now everything left over, we get 18% as a residual distribution. Okay,
Exactly right.
got it. Thank you. All right, that's all.
Great, thank you, Councilmember. Anyone else? Councilmember Mullins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, Jennifer. Great report. And it's definitely exciting to see that our numbers are coming in a lot higher than we anticipated. It's always good to know that to go on the right side instead of being negative. Just a concern, an overall concern, and I know we can't really control it, but we definitely have to keep an eye on, even though we have come in at $8 million unanticipated revenues that we received, I'm still concerned about slide number 10 with the actual sales dropping in the second quarter, coming in at 11.8 for the tax restatement from prior year. I mean, these numbers are still significant. I think I want to get excited, but I'm also concerned about what the economy is looking like. So I want to set that expectation that even though we have the money now, we're facing probably some difficult times in the future. So we have to be careful where we allocate our funds. I know that soon the departments will start working on their budget, which is, I believe, in December. So we need to come back for January reports. So we need to be extremely careful with these numbers and watching if these numbers continue to be in the negative versus they make some adjustments. And as you stated earlier with the auto industry, people are not spending money as much as we think they are. I still think our real estate industry has slowed down a lot. We've been lucky that we're still getting revenue, but they're buying as many homes as they were a year ago because of the interest rate. So there's a lot for us on council that also to be careful. We're getting excited with that kind of money, but we still need to save, I believe, and look for future impact that would have on our budget.
That's exactly right. So Burbank, our revenues have been the beneficiary of inflation somewhat, right? We're seeing this rapid growth. 3 years in a row, we're outperforming our expectations by quite a bit. But we are also subject to cost increases as a result of inflation too. So the question is, which is going to slow down first? Is it our revenue growth or is it our cost increases? And that's the balance that we're trying to maintain as we move forward, right? We don't want to get ahead of ourselves and be counting on revenue as it slows down and then still have these massive cost increases. So we just have to keep both of those things in balance, and it just requires constant monitoring.
Mr.
In
Hess.
addition to that, I agree with Councilmember Mullins in the sense that if you do look at the 5-year forecast, we are in a negative going out. So while we're in a great financial position now, we do need to be mindful of that. I think we have a lot of ideas that I think we could really mitigate that. So I'm not like I'm able to sleep at night, but it's certainly something to still be disciplined about and really be prudent as far as when it comes to our financial situation with respect to the general fund.
Thank you, Mr. Hess. Anything else, Councilmember Mullins?
No, thank you.
Okay, anyone over here? Councilmember Takahashi.
Thank you so much for this thorough review and report. I do have one question on slide 20 where it says financial forecast risks and rewards. On the increase portion, it mentions that entertainment has a growth. And then on the decrease portion, it says that there's a slow bounce back of entertainment. Can you speak a little bit to that?
I was, by entertainment, more like spending on entertainment, right? So where we're not necessarily spending a lot on tangible goods, you do still see people spending on travel, on going out, on, entertainment experiences that the public is spending on. The entertainment industry, that's more of like a business-to-business sale problem, and we are just considerably seeing a slowdown of growth in that area, right? Or, negative growth in the entertainment industry. And it could just be temporary. We assume eventually they're going to have to make those big purchases to keep going, but probably everybody's kind of in a caution mode because of all the losses that happened during the strikes, and it's just not kind of bouncing back as quick as we thought. So we as the public are spending on entertainment, but the industry itself is kind of in a slow mode right now.
Got it. Great. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Mayor, any questions or comments?
Not a question, just comment. Always thank you, Jennifer, for your presentations. They're wonderful. You leave me with very little questions. To the point of Councilor Mullins, yes, we do need to be careful, but I also encourage your team, I encourage your city manager to bring us those ideas. Whenever you have them, I'm ready to look at them. Let's increase our revenue streams. Let's not rely on one thing, and let's make sure we are keeping the money coming in for our city and for our residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Will do.
We definitely will have a couple ideas come in budget time, so be ready.
Okay, well, I don't have any questions, but Ms. Becker, I'll just say, great presentation. I've seen how far you've taken us over the course of 4 years, coming out of the pandemic when it was a pretty dire, in my view, pretty dire outlook. And I think that we're in solid financial health. To the point of Councilmember Mullins, we need to remain vigilant and look at ways to reduce our long-term costs, but I think you and your team have done a really wonderful job, and I think folks should feel pretty confident with where the city of Burbank's at. So just wanted to give kudos to you and your team.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And Burbank is definitely lucky to be in the place where we are compared to our neighboring cities, especially.
Absolutely. All right, colleagues, anything else? Yes, Councilmember Anthony.
Just one last thing, and this is just a comment on the industry, the film and television industry. Everything is in flux right now. The use of AI, the union contracts, film tax credits from state to state are changing. They're being increased or decreased. So everyone is basically in a holding pattern. So they're not, like you said, they're not willing to make those big expenditures. So we'll see. Everyone's waiting. So
Great. Thank you. Seeing no other comments or questions, Ms. Becker, thank you for being here. Great presentation.
Thank you.
And that takes us to our second study session item this evening, which is an update on the new Burbank Central Library and Civic Center project. I welcome Mr. Ken Berkman, Public Works Director, to begin the presentation.
Thank you very much. Honorable Mayor and council members, great to see you. While the presentation's coming up, I'm really pleased to be before you tonight to provide this update on the new Burbank Central Library and Civic Center project and to let you and the public know what's been going on since our last presentation to you in April of 2023. I provided this presentation to the library board last week, and they're very excited to see its progress continue. As I believe you saw, they did want to voice their support personally to you directly, but I thought they could speak at 4:30, so my apologies. I'm the one that messed up on that. But I know I have their approval to say they are in full go mode with this project. So, so a little background. We just celebrated the current Central Library's 60th birthday as it was constructed in 1963. While it has served us well, the city has discussed and contemplated plans to modernize and expand the library in order to properly serve the community for over 30 years, identifying it for renovation or replacement in 1989. Measure L was approved in 2003 to provide funding to replace the library contingent on securing a state library grant, but that grant was never realized. Also in 2003, there was a planned development for the Civic Center block for the library, Community Services Building, and Administrative Services Building, which was actually a bank office that went into service in 1966, but only CSB was completed before the PD expired in 2018. Finance and Management Services staff moved into ASB in 2001, which was supposed to be temporary. Seismic and interior improvements were completed in 2014, while the library had carpet replaced and was painted in 1992. Also, some electrical and IT and other required updates have been completed since then. In 2021, we know the vision study for a new central library was brought before you. And ultimately, the decision was to move forward with pursuing new construction, not renovating the existing library, to place the new library in the upper CSB parking lot as its desired site over towards Olive and Glen Oaks, and determine a financially feasible path forward. And in late 2022, we continued the community outreach process with 1,600 survey responses, several community meetings and commission and committee and board meetings, as well as creating a project website, which we just updated again in July, which significantly increased site views over the summer. Since that last update in April 23, there were several actions taken and work performed by consultants and staff, including the formation of an internal steering committee for the project comprised of staff from the city manager's office, city attorney's office, the community development, library, finance, and public works departments. The consultants finalized an alternatives analysis, evaluations of the housing opportunity sites, financial modeling, cost estimating, and project procurement and delivery options. We also recently completed a geotechnical or soils report and a Phase 1 environmental site assessment in the CSB parking lot where the library is slated to be constructed. So our project goals are still to build a modern central library for the community, to create open space for events and use by downtown residents and visitors, encourage development of mixed use and mixed income housing on the opportunity sites, demonstrate our leadership in sustainability, and support downtown economic development. With all this work completed, the preferred project is still as we see in this exhibit, with a new 65,000 square foot central library and 20,000 square feet of office space to replace ASB on the southeasterly portion of the block, and over 50,000 square feet of functional open space slated next to it where ASB is now. Several housing opportunity sites will be available in this configuration in accordance with the housing element update of the 2035 general plan, and will be considered as part of the downtown Burbank transit-oriented development specific plan that we anticipate bringing before the council this coming summer. You'll recall that we were considering a public-private partnership, or a P3 method of delivery for the project, due to the fact that the private housing construction on the opportunity sites would provide a revenue source for potential concessionaire teams who would design and build both the civic and the private assets. That long-term revenue aspect for the private sector was the nexus for the city to gain upfront funding source for the project and defer any project payments until the library was completed and in use. Since our last update in 2023, there have been several economic factors that have made the P3 option less attractive for the project and the potential bidders, including the fact that there are rising construction costs due to inflation, we have increased borrowing costs due to higher interest rates, and we have higher operating costs per housing units, and then finally rents not being able to keep up with all these costs. So ultimately, we see that the P3 method is no longer attractive to the industry without that private construction elements and the associated long-term revenue sources. So we're shifting away from that P3 delivery and looking at a design, build, procurement strategy as the way to get this project completed. You may recall that design build was a key facet of that P3 delivery method, and as I noted in the last slide, the financing aspect of the P3 is the element that's removed. So with design build, we still have the city contracting with a single design and construction entity. We have a risk transfer still to the design and construction team for design and construction services. It provides a collaborative evaluation of construction and long-term costs versus the budget that we have at the time. Operation and maintenance is a key facet that we look at. Their needs and impacts are considered in design. With bias, very important for Public Works. We take care of these buildings. And early and continuous input from the community and stakeholders and staff is provided. So while we are unbundling, if you will, construction of the housing from the project itself, the long-term goals to construct housing in the future are still in sharp focus, especially with the upcoming completion of the downtown specific plan. That will set the stage for the project and for the opportunity sites. Therefore, those revenue opportunities are still in play as well. We also have the flexibility as to when we bring the additional housing units in the project area, and we reduce the project cost and schedule without the need to design and construct the private improvements with the project. This also puts us in a better position to meet the $9.95 million state library grant deadline to construct certain elements of the library by June 30th of 2027. So obviously our eyes would typically go to the center of the screen and the bold cost line here. So our 2027 forecasted cost for the project is at $147 million with the breakdown that we see there. The one thing we're looking at in particular is the parking needs. Subterranean parking is very costly, and any reduction in the current requirements of about 220 spaces as a result of Community Development Department's ongoing parking study and the specific plan's conclusions and requirements will potentially reduce the number of spaces required and subsequently reduce that almost $30 million burden to the project. And also I want to note our past 5 years of average costs for operation and maintenance and future estimated capital costs for the existing central library and ASB, which stand at $1.5 and $1.2 million a year. And those costs are related to utilities, custodial services, routine maintenance, and small capital improvement projects. And then we also have the kind of next 5 years of long-term capital improvement projects that are about 2 or 3 times those O&M costs based on facility condition assessments for the buildings that we recently completed. Obviously, with the current library and ASB removed from the facilities operation and maintenance and capital programs and replaced by a new state-of-the-art library and open space, those costs would similarly be significantly reduced. So, an overview of our next step shows that we have 3 key tasks to complete. The first of which is to hire a full-service project management consultant team that has demonstrated a successful track record of delivering similar design build projects for public agencies. They'll need to have expertise in planning and design, public outreach, finance, project controls, which is cost and schedule controls, construction management, operations, commissioning, amongst others. We're preparing the request for proposals now and expect to bring a contract award to council in spring of '25. Subsequently, the downtown Burbank TOD specific plan and its environmental impact report are estimated to be in front of council for approval in summer of '25, and that will clear the path for the release of the request for qualifications for the design build services. That qualifications-based selection will likely feed 3 teams into the request for proposal stage and the award of a contract to a design builder in summer of 2026. So that concludes our presentation, and the team and I are happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Berkman. Colleagues, would anyone like to begin with questions or comments? Councilmember Mullins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Berkman. Great report. I have a question regarding the grants for the library on page 5, where we were awarded in 2023 $9.95 million, correct?
Right.
So worst case scenario, what happens if we don't meet? It says significant, that we have to complete significant portion of the construction by June 30th, 2027. So what is significant? What percentage of the project would that be? And what happens if we can't complete that percentage by 2027?
Yes, Councilmember Mullins, there's no percentage that I'm aware of in the requirements, but there are certain elements related to sustainability and other major aspects of the project that need to be started. We think, and we know in talking with the state grant, with the library department staff, they're behind themselves. So I don't expect to have any problem in getting an extension of the grant if we were to so run into that issue. But hopefully we can get those elements going, and we have a time in our schedule to reach out to the state and show that we've made significant progress and ask for that extension.
Okay, thank you. Do you think, or have we looked to see if there is any other opportunities for additional grants? I know the state is having obviously a lot of budget issues. Is there any other fundings out there looking at $147 million that we are anticipating to spend on the project, but we have $9.95 million? Is there any way we can look at other opportunities? Have we looked? Are we going to continue looking?
Yes, continuously. I mean, a project of this magnitude is definitely something that would be highly qualified on the radar for grants that are here for libraries. I personally can't speak to the status of the state's library funding, but I understand it may be reduced. But as we move forward with our project manager, who should have financial expertise and grant expertise to help staff along with financial services, looking at grants as we get closer into design and more, the term we all know is shovel-ready, makes projects much more attractive for funding. So we have this $10 million of seed money, which is a $10 million match that's in our budget as well. and we expect to be much more attractive for future grants, and we will continuously look for them.
Thank you. I do have a comment to make as just an overall comment and a concern. So obviously, we have been talking about this project for such a long time, and the timeline was very helpful to see how far back we've been looking at rebuilding or construction for a new library. And even though I'm very optimistic, and I think under the current situation where we removed the development, the P3, and we're going to focus on the project itself, so I'm being more optimistic that it's going to happen. But I'm also feeling a little reluctant because all these years it hasn't happened and we're running into issues. And I want to give some assurance to the public, especially, that there's a lot of people out in the community who love our library and they want to see a new library, and we've been talking about it for a long time. I'm really concerned that if we're going to be moving ahead on a schedule, and for that, I would like to ask the city manager if we can get an update within 6 months. I think from today, after we approve this, that we get an update for 6 months to tell us what's going on. I think the public needs to hear those updates, so we're not coming a year later saying, okay, well, we're restructuring what we were looking at originally.
Can I amend your motion?
You can do. I'm happy with 3 months if you want to do.
I was going to do quarterly reports to the
I love it.
council via
Okay.
the weekly management report. The other thing too is what I'm hopeful is we do have our new library services director coming aboard on the December 2nd. Eric Lashley, who has built actually award-winning libraries. So I'm kind of excited about his experience coming to the table with a library project like this. In addition, it does scare me too that the price tag too. So we are looking at other big capital projects like Starlight Bowl, like Olive Park. So I don't know if Jennifer is around here, but she's probably breaking out in hives right now. But those are some big money tickets, and so what we'd like to do, especially during the budget time, is come back with a game plan as far as the big capital improvement projects. So there's some. So we at least can plan for these larger projects, which we normally don't do. These are definitely transformative projects that we want to make sure that that we could afford, that get done right, and that get done on time.
I appreciate that. I was actually going to start with every quarter, but I'm being a little gentle, saying 6 months. And I think it's really important for the public to know and hear that we are serious about this. I mean, it's been years that we talked about it, and we're still coming back and saying, okay, we're looking at 2027. So I want to hold ourselves accountable to our residents and the public that are been anticipating for this library to be built for many years, and an update will be helpful, and it would remind all of us where we at in the process. So thank you for that.
Appreciate it, yep.
Thank you, Councilmember. Who'd like to go next? Councilmember Takahashi.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I'm going to follow up a little bit on Councilmember Mullins' questions around timeline and funding. So you probably know, and colleagues probably know, that I've been involved in this project since its inception. I was on the library board when it was first proposed as it's an idea, sparkle in the eye. And I remember when I was on the library board that we were wondering if the community would even be okay with the concept of building a new library and trying to encourage the community to accept this idea. And now to see it where it's at now, where we're like, hurry up already. It's just kind of neat to see that transformation. I was also on the IOB when it came to the IOB for the first time, for the first 10 million first investment. So, and that was a big question of how are we going to get this started? So to kind of watch it kind of go through to this point, it has taken a long time though, but I've seen it through. So a few questions about the timeline. One is about, it has taken a while, and I'm wondering if these changes that you are presenting to us tonight, have these changes from the P3 to the design build, has it delayed the project timeline at all, going from that different approach?
I wouldn't say it delayed it. You know, when we were looking at the P3, it was design, build, finance, operate, maintain. finance, operate, maintain is there because the housing sites were there and the revenue source was going to be there for the private industry to fund our project up front. The time delay really is coming from making sure we're analyzing everything. And in that time, that slide about all the things that have happened with the economy, we were really, I'm not going to say it's a forced marriage, but we were bringing the civic infrastructure industry together with the private housing construction industry. And it was a really great plan. I first heard about it when I started here. It was like 4.5 years ago. But the economic conditions changed. And the fact is now we are focused on building the library. We have that momentum. And the $10 million grant was really a great ignition to keep us going and on this schedule and make sure we're doing it. So this is a great way for us to continue progress. And there are a couple of different methods of design build that should shorten the schedule and ultimately get us pretty close to what we could have been doing if we started this with a P3 like a year ago, let's say, if it was still viable back then.
Right.
But we had some work to do to make sure we dotted our I's, crossed our T's to say, all right, this is the right path. Those economic changes happen, and we changed paths with them. And we have a really good, valuable to the community design build method where there's a lot of early and often communication, and we could really develop this library and what it looks like together.
Okay, great, thank you.
And if I could,
Yeah.
the city center specific plan is also doing a lot of heavy lifting
Yes.
indirectly as far as the environmental land use planning, all that is happening right now. So
Yeah, and to that point, actually, I wanted to know, for the design build RFQ, RFP, do we have to wait until the TOD is done in order to do those RFQs and RFPs?
Yes.
Okay,
That's what I was going to say.
okay, that's what I thought, but I wanted to clarify.
A project such as this and the related mothballing of the current Central Library require review under the California Environmental Quality Act. So that's being done as part of the specific plan.
Okay.
Then it's something that this project team doesn't have to do because we're doing it with the analysis of all of these housing sites and the rezoning for the specific plan.
Okay, so if the TOD is delayed, then that could potentially delay this project.
That's true.
Okay, so we want to make sure, when we're talking about the TOD, that we keep it rolling along. And then last timeline question, so are we on track for that June 2027 timeline that we have to use that funding?
Yes, through the mayor, as I mentioned to Council member Mullins, we do believe we're on track. It is a tight timeline,
Yeah.
but I think we should be able to be in a position, at the very least, to have a very factual, supportive request to the State Library Board that we are making significant progress and we just need a little bit more time to get to that expenditure of those certain facets of the building to spend. So I think we're in good shape.
Okay, let's try to keep on track so we don't have to do that,
Yep.
that ask. All right, and then my last question is around the funding and the P3, shift from P3 to design build. So when we were on when I was on the IOB, we had a really lengthy discussion about the P3. We had training about what the P3 was and understanding it, because it was a totally new concept for us. And one of the things that we talked about on that board was that this was a way, P3 was a way to achieve funding on a project that otherwise would be very, very difficult, if not impossible, to fund on our own. So could you speak a little bit to how we shifted from that perspective of the P3 really is the only way to fund it to now let's go back to design build and we actually can fund it this way? How do we shift our mindset on that?
Councilmember Takahashi, I remember the conversation, and it was a very thorough conversation. I can't say I remember saying it was the only way of funding, certainly. It was the preferred way of funding because we knew at that time, remember the housing mandate and our progress in the specific plans, we said, all right, we're going to be able to build the housing very soon. So we need the private investment to make sure we can do this as quickly as possible. And we were marching on that path. And like I mentioned, it was a really good path. And it really would have worked had the timeline of everything fell into place the right way. We kept doing our analysis, and that just, without the specific plan, even we couldn't move forward. So our hand was forced in a different way of funding, and that's something that we have to explore with you in the budget cycle and with finance and with this full-service project management team that's going to help us identify the best way to fund the project of this magnitude, while also keeping in mind all the other progress that we need to make on significant projects and all our other things we need to do with the city.
Great, okay.
Ms. Becker, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah.
Sure. I'd just like to add, just to clarify for the council and the public, a bit of the difference between the financing of a P3 versus the traditional design build that we're looking to do. And fundamentally, of course, what every finance director likes about a P3 is somebody does the financing for you, right? The developer takes the risk, they go out and build the project, and then they charge you for their costs, right? And so you're essentially like leasing your asset from the developer who built it on your behalf. And because there's a housing component involved, we get a little bit of revenue back that helps us pay some of the costs of the asset. We still have every intention to do it. The difference is we're sort of breaking it into two pieces. So we will do our own financing essentially for the design build project. Burbank is in a very fortuitous place to be able to do that, right? We have no general fund debt to speak of. We have a dedicated revenue source for infrastructure. And an excellent credit rating. So those three things make it very feasible for us. But we still are in our long-term plan and part of the specific plan that housing is still going to come on board. It's just not going to be part of this specific project. We're sort of bifurcating it. And by doing so, now you have a lot more folks who can get involved because you have your capital asset people who can build your library and your housing people who can build your housing, and you're not trying to get one person to do it all. So we do, and I still am very much, positive that we need to bring that housing on board because the revenue that will be generated from building the housing units will help us pay the debt service on the library. So those two components really do still have to happen. They're just not going to happen simultaneously.
Okay.
And by not doing them at the same time, we're allowed to sort of push forward with the library at maybe a little bit faster pace. And we might have a couple years of delay between the time we're making the debt service on the library and the time that we're bringing in revenue from the housing. But overall, it should still work out for the city in our favor.
Great. Thank you. That is so helpful. Thank you for clarifying that. Because I remember back when this first started, that if we had talked about this in this way in the very beginning, I think that would have been like, no. But so I think that we've really gotten to a point where we're exploring the different options. The P3 opened up the idea of that we can do this. We've come down this road, and it sounds like we are really progressing in a way that hopefully this will happen on the timeline we have it set for. But it's definitely got momentum, as you said, which is super exciting to see this happening. I'm sure my other library board colleague will agree with me about that, seeing that finally coming to fruition.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember. Vice Mayor, did you want to jump in?
Definitely, and I definitely wholeheartedly agree. That was my one question in the end, what happened with the P3 project, but I believe you answered that very thoroughly, and it's interesting to see that when I was on the library board, while you were on IOB, we had the same presentation. It was very thorough, and it presented all of the benefits and costs, but mostly benefits of going down the P3 road and having a developer take it on and manage the financing. So had the same question, but I think it is also telling to us as a city what the market looks like now, because there was a lot more interest in P3 projects from the private sector back then.
Yeah.
And now there seems to not be. So it's just, food for thought for us too as we move forward.
Yeah, it was perfectly stated by Ms. Becker, bifurcating the process. That revenue source is still there, and it'll just come at a later time.
Definitely. Thank you so much for the presentation. I look forward to seeing you again next quarter.
Good. Happy to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Anthony.
I think it's a smart move, splitting it up. Get the one civic center and library done, and then deal with the old library as needed. Just don't wait too long so it ends up being a Spirit Halloween store. That's all I ask.
You got it.
Well, to be fair, we do get revenue off of Spirit, but
All right, I rescind that. Thank you.
Mr. Berkman, I just had a one question and I guess a couple comments. Ms. Librado, could you display slide number 6 again? So I know this is the conceptual site plan, and it sounds like we're going to have to do this in phases now. It'll be on screen in just a moment. But in the conceptual site plan, there are 1, 2, 3 separate housing opportunity sites that are identified. Can you remind me roughly how many of units of housing are we hoping to build on those 3 sites, collectively speaking?
Mr. Mayor, personally, I don't have that number offhand.
I think it was
And
like
I
between
glanced.
125 to 150 per site. So I think it was a total like 450.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
So that was my only question. I just had 2 brief thoughts or comments on this. 450 units is significant in meeting our RHNA goal, Regional Housing Needs Assessment, which is an important goal to take us out from under the thumb of some very impactful state legislation. So I guess I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask you the question, but my one concern is this aspect of the project being delayed, in my mind, does potentially make it that much harder to achieve that housing goal, and therefore could put us in further peril depending on what happens at the state level. So just an encouragement to staff that while that's going to be a separate financing and development component, that we need to make sure that we are pursuing those opportunities, because as Ms. Becker said, that is a critical piece to financing the entirety of the project. The only other comment that I had was, I'm just going to be very candid. I am a little wary about being too confident in getting an extension from the state. I'm not an expert. I don't work for that department. But with a rather large state budget deficit and costs that are going to be on the horizon, whether it's a film tax credit or the governor's new mandate for more litigation costs against the federal government, I just worry that certain state departments could be looking for any and every opportunity to save cost, and that could take the form of not granting an extension. So I understand that that's the backup plan, but I think that everything and anything that we can do to achieve that timeline, break ground, and make progress so we don't have to ask for an extension, that's going to be the safest course of action for Burbank. So just this council member's 2 cents on the matter. Does that bring up any other questions or comments?
No, Mr. Mayor, I think you made an excellent point, and we're going to make sure to remind him every 3 months where the timeline is at. So no fear, because we'll remind you. Sorry, the pressure is on now.
We'll get that specific plan done, and we'll be on our way. That's what we'll do.
Very good. Unless there are any other questions or comments, seeing none. Mr. Berkman, thank you very much for the presentation this evening. Good job. With that, the council will go into recess until 6 p.m., which is our regular start time. We thank you all for joining us, and we'll be back in about 10 or 12 minutes.